Hi, I'm Alan Peterson, and I want to welcome you today to our discussion on the science of healing, the power of redox signaling. Our guest today is Dr. Gary L. Samuelson. Dr. Samuelson, welcome to the show today.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Samuelson, tell us a little bit about your background, your education, and some of the things that you've done that has given you a unique perspective on the things we're talking about today.
Well, I've always been interested in health in this perspective of how science can be used then to an understanding of our health processes. But I'm a physicist. I'm an atomic physicist. I have a PhD in atomic/medical physics. And so I deal with health issues a little bit differently. I look at them on the atomic level, how atoms interact and how molecules interact and how this knowledge and understanding then can help us understand what's taking place inside our body.
Now, Dr. Samuelson, I know that you're not going to say some of these things. You're going to be entirely too modest today. There are some things that I would like to tell our audience and let them know about you. First of all, as you said, Dr. Samuelson, he was awarded his PhD in atomic and medical physics from the University of Utah. Additionally, he has received the American Association of Physics Teachers Award for teaching excellence. And his work is now as an independent science consultant to help bridge the gap between promising emerging technologies and commercialization efforts in the health science field. He has worked on stabilizing nanoparticle structures integral to several promising technologies. And Dr. Samuelson was the first to discover stable redox signaling complexes that are now being studied worldwide, and he's also helped to further stabilize them. Dr. Samuelson is also devoted to advancing the science behind such promising technologies to the highest extent possible. Now, given your background, Dr. Samuelson, you approach health and healing processes not in the way a medical doctor would, looking at symptoms, treating symptoms, but by going to the root of the problem on a cellular level, on an atomic level, finding out why these things are happening and how we can impact them. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, it's an extremely interesting area of research. As we start understanding how the body works, everything is now pointing to, well, how does it work on the molecular level? Because our bodies are made of cells, and the cells are made of molecules and DNA and other things that we're familiar with. But how do these little molecules and micromachines actually interact, how they work to make us a living creature? That's exciting.
When you were a kid, what were some of the experiences that you had that kind of told you, you know what, this is what I like, this is what I enjoy, and this is what I'm good at?
Oh, this is crazy. I was a really strange kid. Whenever I would take a road trip, I'd stare out the window and say, well, why is the sky blue? Why are the mountains there? Why? I'd look at plants and animals and all living things on the earth and say, well, how in the world do these things work? And I'd cut a little blade of grass off and think, and watch it grow back over time. I said, my goodness, how does it know exactly how to grow back into that structure and form? So I was always fascinated with that sort of thing all throughout my life.
Now, today in society, there are a lot of problems, and few things are getting as much attention these days as healthcare and the healthcare industry. And as a professional, an academician in that universe, tell me what you're seeing in healthcare today. First of all, from kind of an overall perspective. And then let's talk about some of the individual problems that we face, some of the threats that we face as individuals.
As a scientist and studying the body, you realize that there are certain physical laws that apply to how you function. And as a functioning organism, you need food, you need nourishment, you need other things. And those are provided mostly by nature, and they have been for millions of years as far as we know.
Right.
And these rules need to be understood. Well, for hundreds of years at least, doctors have been accumulating understanding and knowledge about how to cure and diagnose disease. Mm-hmm. What do we do when something gets sick?
Sure.
And that is a wonderful pursuit because, of course, you get a lot of information along the way. And we do medical research and we try to understand. Now we're to the point, however, where we can understand on a cellular level, on a more basic level, why we get sick. So we're not trying to treat symptoms or trying to treat the outcome of the sickness. We're trying to understand, what is causing the sickness and what's happening there.
So instead of just looking at the after effects, now we have the opportunities to go in and really understand what is causing things, where things are starting.
Yeah, that's right. And we have science to back it up.
Right.
Lots of science. And interestingly enough, the medical industry is not really catching up to that point. So as I look at it, we've become exceedingly good at diagnosing disease, understanding what we have. We categorize it. We can say, you have such and such a thing. And then we're also very good at using medical knowledge up to this date in order to solve that problem. And if you look into the research that's being done in the medical field, you can also see that we are making great strides, I should say, to understand how the body works and what the mechanisms are behind the body, and how we can use that information and knowledge then to our benefit. But to this point, the healthcare system really looks to me like a sick care system. You're reacting to a problem, and without understanding quite why we developed this problem.
Yeah, tell us about that sick care system.
Well, talking about the cost of the healthcare system here in the United States, currently we spend about 16% of our GMP on healthcare. That's a huge number. You think of that as, for example, in relationship to our defense spending, which is about 6%. No other industrialized nation on the earth spends more than about 10% of their gross national product on healthcare. So that 6% extra could actually cover the national defense budget.
What are some of the other facts that concern you about the healthcare industry?
Well, you think if you consider all the industrialized nations that we have, we're spending twice as much on healthcare than all of the others combined or averaged, especially the next 20 at least of the industrialized countries. Twice as much means that we should get twice the benefit, you'd think. And yet the World Health Organization and others that are evaluating healthcare in international settings have said that we're not even in the top 10. In fact, we're just barely making the top 20 as far as the quality of our healthcare is concerned. Our life expectancy is about the same as that of someone growing up in Mexico.
Wow.
And we don't even get to see the doctor that often because it's just too expensive. So our healthcare system, as far as taking care of our health, is falling way short of the mark.
So we have a system that, if we can afford it, takes care of us when we're sick, but is not contributing to keeping us healthy. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's not preventative. It's actually a reactive sort of a healthcare system.
Well, if that's the case, then how do we provide for us? How do we get good health care?
The greatest asset I think that we have toward good health care is knowledge. It's education. Understanding how our body works and the mechanisms that create health in our body, and then using that knowledge and applying it then to improving our health, improving our quality of life.
Well, do you know what I like about this is the fact that that means that I can do something about my health care. Anyone who's listening to us can take the responsibility and educate themselves. We can gain knowledge ourselves. We have lots of resources that allow us to do that. So I think it's important to note that maybe the first line of defense or the first responsibility for our own health care is ourselves. It rests with us. And that's very empowering because I can do something about that. When you talk about knowledge, you have some knowledge that you need to share with us. Please go ahead and tell us what we can see inside of a cell.
Well, I like to think of it in this way. If you were a diver and you could then shrink yourself down to about the size of a virus, and you'd see the cell as about the size of a large swimming pool. And you could then dive into the cell and look what's going on. So let's do that. That's a lot of fun.
Okay, excellent.
On the outside of the cell, there are little receptors. I call them mailboxes. They allow food and nourishment to get into the cells, and then the waste products to get out. We could dive through one of those.
So there are these passageways as we dive into the cell, these receptors, that not only will we go back and forth, but all of the materials that a cell needs can come back and forth through those, and any waste products can exit through those receptors, correct?
That's right. That's
okay.
The only way to get in.
Okay.
Or out for most things. And so let's dive into our cell. And the thing that would strike us probably at the very beginning is just the activity, the scope of activity that's taking place.
So it's not just a calm, tranquil environment. There's a lot going on.
Oh, it's a metropolis of activity. Well, if you peer inside the nucleus, you'll see strands of DNA. And those, again, are the instructions sets that allow everything to happen. Now, whenever the DNA button is pushed or a gene is activated, it'll send out RNA messengers that will tell these micromachines what to do on the outside. So you'll see all these messengers coming out.
So the DNA is really kind of the master controller and sends the signals out to tell the cell and these messengers what to do to continue these processes that are going on in the cell. Is that right?
Well, even more than that.
Okay.
It's actually the architect. It has all the instructions to build these little micromachines that do the work inside the cell.
Wow.
So you'll see things called ribosomes, and the messengers will go inside the ribosomes and will create the proteins that the cell then uses. Proteins are micromachines that the cell uses to carry on processes of life. So it actually creates these little guys, and then when they're no longer needed, it has enzymes that tear them apart into their components, and then the nuclear message comes again to create some more. It's like putting together Legos almost.
Huh.
Right?
So we've got builders and recyclers
Yeah.
that are building up the materials that our cells need, and then when they're done, there are these little micromachines that tear it all down and recycle it so it can be used again for other processes.
That's right. And they're all fueled by the fuel that comes from the mitochondria. So they fuel themselves, they regulate themselves, they build themselves up, they do their job, and when they're no longer needed, they take themselves apart.
Just amazing. Now, tell us a little bit more about how these messages get from the nucleus to the other places in the cell that they need to be.
Well, as you probably could understand, on this whole bustling metropolis, there needs to be signals being passed and forth. They need to coordinate their efforts.
Right.
And so they're signaling molecules. There's molecules in the environment that are created in order to make sure that everything is coordinated and orchestrated correctly inside the cell. It's actually the secret of life. The homeostatic balance basically means that at the same rate as these things are created, they're taken apart. So, and that's very important. You know, in business, they use that model too. You've got to ship out your product as fast as it's being created.
Yeah, or you create backlogs and problems inside your business.
Exactly. And so if you're a good manager in your business, you'll realize that there's an inventory problem if things start building up or things then are deficient. And the DNA guy, the nuclear guy that's pushing all the genetic buttons, he uses that information then to make changes inside the cell.
So if there's an imbalance, that tells him that something is out of whack, and then that allows these processes to focus on what's going wrong and to try and reestablish balance. Is that correct?
That's right. He knows which buttons to push depending on the imbalances he finds in the environment. You're inside these fluids swimming around, and then we're going kind of back into this image. Mm-hmm. The question you might want to ask is, well, what am I swimming in? All of life and all of biochemistry takes place inside of salt water. Everything we've talked about is taking place in a huge bath of salt water.
Huh.
And these micromachines then have been exceedingly expert at reducing and oxidizing this salt water, modifying the salt water, in order to create certain reactive molecules from these simple components.
Okay. So instructions come from the nucleus, and through those instructions, the environment that everything is living in is actually changed to help facilitate the processes that are going on in the cell.
Yes, sort of that way.
Okay. Help clarify that for us.
This reduction and oxidation is called redox.
Reduction,
oxidation.
Okay,
right.
redox, okay.
So these redox processes in the saltwater solution change the nature of the saltwater. Well, that changes the nature of how all of the other biological elements in micromachines work in that environment. So including, by the way, what's happening inside the nucleus. So the nucleus is able to read basically the imbalances that are happening inside the saltwater solution.
Okay, so as the saltwater solution changes, that indicates a shift in the balance.
Right.
And the nucleus is then able to, the guy in there pushing the DNA buttons is able to assess that imbalance and then take appropriate action to try to bring things back into balance.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you give us an example of some of the kinds of things that might happen? What are some examples of imbalance that might happen in the cell?
Well, yes, the cell, if we're talking about redox signaling molecules, the imbalance in redox signaling molecules are often caused by a disruption of the cell of some sort, a damage. For example, if the cell were to be attacked by bacteria, for example, it would start causing damage and disrupting all of these complex interactive processes. Now, that kind of makes its way down into the metabolism of sugars, and the mitochondria then start to produce an imbalance. Mitochondria, by the way, are the organelles that produce most of the redox signaling molecules that are found in the body.
Okay.
They're sort of the hub of this network of communication inside the cells, and we'll talk about between the cells a little later, too. Anyway, so the mitochondria start pumping out more of the oxidants.
Well, let's talk about this process of oxidizing. Let's make sure we explain that very clearly for our audience so they know what is happening when you talk about oxidizing. What is happening in this environment when you talk about an oxidative process occurring?
Oxidants are very, very potent molecules. They're very reactive. They'll cause damage to almost everything that they run into, including, let's say, the nucleus. And I've heard people explain it like oxidation. You can see it in rust on metal and things like that. I mean, that's kind of a very rough picture.
Sure.
But inside the cell, you'd think of it as a little molecular shark that's going around and really destroying some of the structures that you'd see inside the cell.
So the oxidants can negatively impact and destroy the structures in the cell, correct? But do they have any positive value? I have to believe they've got some positive value or they wouldn't be there in the first place.
That's right. And now we're starting to talk a little bit about antioxidants and reductants.
And we've heard about antioxidants. That's kind of a buzzword in the health industry now, and we all want more antioxidants.
Right.
What are the antioxidants?
Well, the antioxidants are micro machines that were created by the nucleus that have one specific purpose. They want to eliminate the oxidants that are naturally produced in salt water. Antioxidants then take the reductants and oxidants that they find in their environment and then combine them in a catalytic process to eliminate the oxidants. So the oxidants and reductants are being created by the mitochondria. They're floating around in the saltwater solution that we're swimming in. And then they encounter antioxidants, and antioxidants then eliminate them. So this is where we've got homeostatic balance. You know, the mitochondria creates it as fast as the antioxidants are able to absorb it and eliminate it.
So that keeps that balance.
That's right.
Okay.
In healthy cells, this is happening all the time. So oxidants are not bad per se. In fact, if we were to take the oxidants away, we'd suffer some grave circumstances.
What are some of the things that might happen if we didn't have oxidants?
Well, as I mentioned, these oxidants are used as a signaling network. So when the cell is attacked by a bacteria or undergoes a challenge, it starts to build up oxidants. And those oxidants then are the signal or messenger to the nucleus that something is wrong. So what does the nucleus guy do? He tries to fix a problem. He pushes the genes that are necessary to repair whatever problem caused oxidation in the cell.
So they're almost like the gauge, the barometer of the balance in the cell.
Exactly.
Okay.
We call them redox signaling molecules just for that. They signal the cell that something is wrong and then allow the cell to repair itself.
Well, how critical then are these redox molecules?
Well, they're fundamental to all life. When we're talking about not only cells inside our body, but in plants and animals, lower forms of life, every form of life that exists on the planet has learned to use redox signaling to help understand how to repair, detect damage, repair, and replace damaged cells.
Now, even I have heard about things like antioxidants and oxidants and those kinds of things. Why haven't I heard much about redox signaling molecules?
Oh, it's a new science.
Huh.
I mean, I'm here actually because I started to look into this science. It's only about 9 years old, and realized that it was very fundamental to all life processes. Well, this knowledge is fundamental to all life, and the knowledge of how redox signaling works is fundamental to all life. So there's an impetus. There's a reason why we should study this. And since its inception now, there have been hundreds now of articles every month published. Now, these are science, peer-reviewed articles every month that are published on redox signaling.
So this isn't just people who are interested in the healthcare industry and are out doing a little research on the web.
No.
These are scientific studies based in our well-established research institutions around the country, correct?
That's right. Scientists that have actually dedicated their whole life to understanding these processes. And these 100 papers, by the way, that are being written a month, they represent about 3 months of research for each paper. So we're talking about 300 months of research.
So tell us what you've learned. What are some of the most fascinating things that you have learned about these molecules?
Probably the most interesting thing that you learn about these molecules is that they're responsible for the process of healing and immune response inside the body. We talked a little bit about how the body detects a problem, or how a cell detects a problem. Now, the body is made out of networks of trillions, in fact, 50 to 100 trillion cells inside your body. And all of these cells then need to be able to talk to one another. They need to understand what their state of affairs is,
right,
in order to respond to outside threats and to damage. This redox signaling network that we're talking about, we talked about the internal workings of the cell. It extends far beyond the internal workings. When a cell becomes damaged, these redox signals go to the neighboring cells. And the neighboring cells then can respond to the environment as well as the cell itself.
Well, the more that I'm learning about this, the more I'm thinking these are incredibly important. And as an individual, what do I do to maintain the health or the balance of these redox signaling molecules?
That's a very good question, because if our healing response depends on how well this network of redox signaling molecules reacts, and we ought to know, well, how to create this balance inside our bodies.
Certainly, and I would think that would be important for everyone, particularly as we talked about the situation of healthcare and the fact that an individual has a responsibility now. The only way to really have good health is to take control of your own healthcare. Then knowing about this fundamental process would be really crucial, and knowing if there are things that I can do as an individual to impact this. Because, I hate to say it, but we all change as we get older, and our bodies are less able to deal with the threats that we encounter. And so understanding this redox signaling mechanism could have a huge impact on my ability to take care of myself.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned that we kind of degrade over time. If you look at a young child, that young child is able to heal itself very quickly.
Sure.
He gets a cut or a scrape, no problem. He goes out and runs and plays all day. He doesn't get sore muscles.
Yeah.
That's simply because the redox signaling networks in his body are about 100% efficient. And then as we age, the efficiency of these networks, now the redox signaling again is telling the cell that damage has taken place, allows it to call the immune system to get rid of the bacterial threats and whatever, and then either repair itself or replace itself. Now, I haven't talked a little bit about that, but if you have a problem with a cell, you only have two of those options. Either the buttons work, the genetic buttons to repair itself work, or the cell has to push the big shutdown button.
Wow,
which
the self-destruct button.
Right. And then the cell will destroy itself. And that's not a problem, because there are many cells in the environment, and they'll realize the cell is gone, that their neighbors are missing, and they divide and they take the place, and the tissues, rather, have been repaired.
So there's not only this recycling process going on inside the cells that we talked about, but also between the cells.
Yes.
They're recycling and dividing and growing and filling those gaps, and when one is destroyed, another one fills in. But as we get older, what happens to that process?
Then as that communication network starts to become less and less efficient, now as a cell becomes damaged, it's no longer immediately repaired or replaced. So healing is a little bit slower.
Right.
And about the age of 70 or say, we're only about at 10% of the efficiency that we were when we were a child.
Wow. Well, is there anything we can do about that?
Probably the most important thing to understand that in order for cells to be healthy, they need proper nutrition. So that the body is built to take the nutritional elements in our environment and then to turn them into cell food. I don't know if you know, but they have cells from people that have died 50 years ago perfectly healthy, perfectly viable. And scientists just know what to feed them to keep them viable.
And so they've continued to remain viable
Right.
after 50 years,
That's correct.
simply because of the nutrition.
That's correct, yes.
Wow.
You feed the cell what it needs.
That sounds like
it
something
stays
out of a
healthy.
science fiction movie.
Welcome to my world. Everything in my world is that way.
So one element is nutrition. And there's a lot of information out there today about nutrition and what a healthy diet looks like. What are some other things that you see have an impact on the cells or on this redox signaling that we can do to have an impact on it?
Okay. Believe it or not, the redox signaling, the balance, equilibrium in our body can be affected by our mind. So a positive mental attitude can physically, measurably make a difference in the levels of redox signaling molecules in our body.
Okay, so we've got good nutrition, positive mental attitude. What are some other things?
I've been involved in a discovery of sorts. Now, here's the idea. Suppose now we have redox signaling molecules that we can infuse into the tissues of our body. What would we expect to happen then if they become unbalanced, for example? Can we actually help them become more efficient in restoring the balance? Basically, accelerating the healing process.
Okay.
So if these guys hold all of the keys to the buttons that regulate the healing process, can we then infuse these into our tissues and cells and control or maybe accelerate the healing process that's taking place? Now, would that be a benefit? Of course.
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, would it be a benefit to all the systems of our body? Of course.
Certainly, sounds like.
There's no place.
That's almost obvious, even for a guy like me with no chemistry background. And from what you told me, yes, absolutely, that would be of benefit. Okay, well, let's then talk about where you see the potential applications for this redox signaling science.
Well, there are just a broad variety of areas. In fact, all areas of medical science certainly could benefit from this technology. There isn't a system in the body. Let's take mental health, for example. Neurodegenerative disorders such as Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, dementia. It's going to affect us one way or another as we age. And so keeping these cells alive and healthy and well and defending themselves and replacing themselves, et cetera, absolutely essential to countering the effects of the degeneration in our brains. Now, this can apply to cardiovascular systems.
Give us an example of how it could impact the cardiovascular system.
Redox signaling, of course, affects the healing process. If you allow something to remain unhealed, then you build up a condition called oxidative stress, which is an excess amount of oxidants in the environment. So oxidative stress then sends these oxidants into the bloodstream.
Okay.
That, of course, can cause damage in and of itself. But immune cells then respond to that signal.
So they get that signal that says there's oxidative stress, and then the immune cells respond.
Right. And I don't know if you know this, but your immune cells are inside your blood, kind of rolling along the inside of the blood vessel. When they come to a place where they see there's oxidative stress, they'll actually seep out of the blood vessel and into the stressed tissue.
So that signal of oxidative stress causes the reactions of various cells in our body, and they almost follow that signal, almost like a trail, to the place of damage or impact.
That's correct. Now, if the cells have not healed themselves, they got rid of the initial problem, but the oxidative stress hasn't gone away, then these immune cells start to build up. And this happens to be what causes hard plaques to build up in our arteries and such, atherosclerosis. And a lot of heart disease can be caused because of chronic oxidative stress that's causing these sort of things to happen in our blood vessels.
Okay, so neurological issues, cardiovascular issues, what else? And we could probably be here, like you said, all day, because earlier you talked about the fact that these redox signaling messengers are pervasive. They're everywhere. They're in every cell. So if we can impact what's happening with those, we can theoretically then impact every cell in our body, correct?
That's correct.
That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary.
That's the power of this technology. It isn't specific to any system or part of the body. It's actually universal.
It is a comprehensive way to impact our own health.
That's correct.
What are some other areas that you feel are going to be impacted by this research on redox signaling?
Well, redox signaling is so general that it can almost impact every area of science. Now, I didn't mention this before, but redox signaling messengers actually form the weapon of choice of the immune system. So let's look at infectious disease. How does the body kill bacteria? Well, what does it use? It uses redox signaling molecules, which are actually antimicrobial. They kill bacteria. And yet, those same substances are easily handled by our healthy tissue. I mean, obviously, the immune system can't use something that'll destroy our healthy tissue.
Right.
So why don't we look into these sort of redox signaling compounds that are antimicrobial and also can preserve healthy tissue? Now, that's a remarkable thing. And we're talking about penicillin type thing here because, we have something that's non-toxic that the body already uses. It's native to us. And yet it can be used to counter almost all of the microbes and things that challenge us in our environment, including the resistant strains.
Well, and you talk about in your book the fact, and use the example of penicillin as this new platform that created almost a cascade effect on other drugs, other treatments that impacted our health. Is redox signaling research similar? Is it a new platform?
Absolutely. When we're talking about a platform, well, what are we talking about? Penicillin is a non-toxic agent that is able to kill bacteria. Is that it? Yeah, that's pretty much it. And so we can take it inside our body and it'll kill bacteria, but it won't harm our healthy cells. Redox signaling molecules actually are the same thing. You see, they're native to the body so that the body actually does not see them as being toxic. In my laboratory, we've done a lot of studies on toxicity of redox signaling molecules. Mm-hmm. And I found that if you balance them correctly, there's absolutely no toxicity at all, zero toxicity in any of the systems of the body, in any of the tissues of the body. In fact, the cells are smiling at us under the microscope.
So potentially no side effects of any kind.
That's right, if you do it right, if you're able to do this right, yeah. So you can see now almost an unlimited potential. So what can we affect? Well, my wife was cutting vegetables one day, and she cut her finger, mm-hmm. And I was working with the redox signaling compounds, and so I thought, I guess it's time.
Get to experiment on my wife.
Yeah. It was bleeding. It was about a 4 millimeter cut. It was, couldn't be stopped. And so I said, honey, would you put your finger in this compound? I poured her a little glass, and she put her finger in, and the bleeding stopped immediately. And I saw healing taking place in seconds that usually would take minutes to take place. So it stopped the bleeding. Of course, it was antimicrobial, too, so it had that benefit. It was soothing. It didn't hurt her at all. In fact, she was very happy that it stopped.
Yeah.
It stopped the throbbing pain. And she took it out and looked at it and started cutting vegetables again. And I was sitting there looking at what had happened because the blood had kind of pooled at the bottom. It didn't diffuse or it didn't coagulate. It just sat there at the bottom of the cup, sitting there as a scientist I am. And then the next day I took a look at my wife's finger, and I really couldn't tell that it had been cut at all. I had to look really carefully.
Wow.
And so healing that should have taken place in days, took place in hours. So I started realizing, oh my goodness, these redox signaling molecules are actually doing what we think they should do. And that is making the signaling process more efficient so that the healing can be accelerated in these tissues.
That's amazing. Do you have any other examples from your research or that give us some insight into the power of these redox signaling molecules?
Wow. Yes. Well, I talked to you a little bit about how we have used these in cell cultures. Now, I'm a physicist, so I don't know too much about biology, but I do have a lot of friends that are involved and senior researchers in national laboratories. And I've been studying these, and I've said to them, hey, I want you to find if these are toxic or not. Please, I want to see if these compounds are toxic. So I send them off. We started realizing, after we realized they were non-toxic, that they actually do bioactive things in the body. They actually do something to these cell cultures. We look at, for example, the efficiency of antioxidants. You know, if you remember, the antioxidants are the things that kind of break down these redox signaling molecules in the body.
Right.
And so if we provide more of them to the antioxidants, maybe they'll be able to utilize the redox signaling molecules in that environment to make themselves more efficient. And these are great because they're endogenous. They're inside us already. So the antioxidants, we don't have to eat them or take them. And so we found that when we put redox signaling molecules in cell cultures, that it made them able to handle oxidants, or antioxidant efficiency of these cultures increased by about 5-fold. And
wow.
And so, yeah. And so we're talking about doing absolutely nothing other than just adding redox signaling molecules. And then we're getting such an increase in antioxidant efficacy.
Are there times, as you see these examples and you continue your work, that it's even hard for you to believe what you're discovering?
Every day. Every day I'm reading these hundreds of peer-reviewed articles seeing what redox signaling does in the body. And I'm saying to myself, my goodness, if only 10% of this plays out, it'll be the greatest discovery in medical science that has ever taken place on the earth.
It seems almost miraculous. There's part of it seems almost too good to be true. But you're seeing it every day with your own eyes.
Yes.
Amazing. Amazing. Let me ask you, is work being done to provide that redox signaling supplement?
Yes. I've worked at this. I'm an atomic physicist, so I'm at a very good vantage for this because I deal with atoms and I deal with stabilization of nanoparticles and such. So I've dealt with these sort of problems before on a theoretical basis. So redox signaling molecules, well, it's just another one. And so we've been able to stabilize these redox signaling molecules to have half-lives of 2 years instead of, just a
So not the milliseconds.
Right.
2 years.
Exactly.
Incredible.
And so it's coming to the point where we can actually put these things in a bottle. We can ship them off to laboratories that have them tested. We can actually do things scientifically with redox signaling molecules.
Amazing. Dr. Samuelson, as we have discussed here, as an individual, there are things that I can do to take care of myself and have an impact on my health. I don't have to wait and rely on the healthcare system or on doctors to do something positive for my health. We've talked about good nutrition. We've talked about maintaining a positive mental attitude. And then the third thing that I think is really critical is we've talked about education. I can gain knowledge and understanding and apply that to myself. One of those tools, I think, is your book. Now, how can we get your book? Where can we go to find your book?
My book is made available at www.asiastore.com.
So if I go to www.asiastore.com, and that's ASEASTORE.com, I can find your book. And let me just have you describe your book quickly. What is your book about and what does it do?
Well, it basically outlines in a much more detailed but a very clear and concise manner the things that we've talked about today. It talks about the science of healing and how that redox signaling molecules play such a role in the healing process. And it goes then into various areas in much more depth than I could, of course, just sitting here with you. But it's written on a lay level. I do go through and I introduce, for example, DNA, and I introduce all of the actors and players in the cell, sort of just to let you know what they look like. I have pictures of molecules and pictures of things, but not necessarily so you understand all of the intricacies. Simply that you realize these things are actors that are playing inside your cell, and they need to communicate, and then I introduce redox signaling molecules.
Well, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I mean, to the point that I was sharing it with my wife and with my children and talking to them about these little machines that are working in our body. And so I think anyone who has an interest in their own health will find great value in this book. And I would encourage them to go to the website and pick it up and take that opportunity to, do something about that third component, education, learning about what we can do to help ourselves. Well, Dr. Samuelson, I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Now, if, like me, as you've heard this discussion, you are interested in finding out more about what you can do to impact your health, how you can take greater responsibility to find the health that you're looking for, I'm going to ask you to do two things. First of all, I want you to talk to the person who gave you this CD. That's a person who's very interested in helping you find ways to take care of yourself and your family better than you've been able to in the past. Call them, talk to them, find out from them what more you can do to understand how to take care of your health. The second thing is if you're interested in learning more about the things Dr. Samuelson's discussed and seeing more of his research, please visit www.aseastore.com. That's ASEASTORE.com and order his book, The Science of Healing Revealed by Dr. Gary L. Samuelson.